In the busy and lively city of Lumora, Chief Ekwu was a wealthy and well-respected businessman. He had 2 children, a son named Chiy and a daughter named Niari. However, from the time they were young, it was clear that Chief Ekwu favored Chiy over Niari. He showered his son with love, attention, and the best opportunities, while he treated his daughter as if she barely existed. Niari's mother, Nande, had passed away when she was still a little girl. Without her mother's love and protection, Niari was left to be raised by her father and his new wife, Masika. But Masika had no love for Niari. Instead, she saw her as a burden and did everything she could to turn Chief Ekwu against his own daughter. She whispered cruel words into his ears, making him believe that Niari was worthless, a waste of his time and resources. Slowly, his heart hardened toward Niari, and she became nothing more than an unwanted shadow in her own home. From a young age, Niari's life was filled with struggles. While her brother Chiy lived like a prince, she was treated like a servant in her own home. Chiy had everything a child could dream of: beautiful clothes, expensive toys, and the best education. He was sent to the most prestigious schools in Lumora, where he learned from the finest teachers. Meanwhile, Niari was left behind, forced to stay home and do all the household chores. Every morning, before the sun even rose, Niari would wake up and begin her long day of work. She scrubbed the floors, washed the dishes, and cooked meals, yet no one ever thanked her. Masika, her stepmother, constantly found fault with everything she did. If Niari missed a spot while cleaning, or burned the food slightly, she was met with harsh words and sometimes even slaps. Chiy, on the other hand, never had to lift a finger. He would wake up late, eat the meals that Niari prepared, and then leave for school in a car driven by their family chauffeur. Whenever Niari asked if she could also go to school, Chief Ekwu would dismiss her without a second thought. "Why waste money on a girl's education?" he would say. "Her place is in the kitchen." Masika would smirk in the background, pleased that her plan to keep Niari powerless was working. The little girl would watch sadly as Chiy left the house with his books and uniforms, wishing she had the same chance. Despite the unfairness, Niari never let bitterness take root in her heart. She remained kind and hard-working, determined to find happiness even in the smallest things. When she finished her chores, she would sneak outside to watch the neighborhood children doing their homework. Sometimes, a kind neighbor would lend her a book, and she would read by the dim light of a candle at night. She taught herself everything she could, using whatever little resources she could find. Though life was cruel to her, Niari never gave up. She believed that one day things would change. She held on to hope, refusing to let her difficult circumstances break her spirit. But deep down, she knew that as long as she stayed in that house, she would never be free. As Niari grew older, the distance between her and her father became even greater. Chief Ekwu barely looked at her anymore, as if she didn't exist. When he did speak to her, it was only to give orders or scold her for things that weren't her fault. Masika had poisoned his heart completely, making him believe that Niari was nothing but a burden. She constantly reminded him that feeding and housing the girl was a waste of money. "She is of no use to you, my husband," Masika would say, shaking her head in fake concern. "She only takes and gives nothing in return. How long will you let her stay here, eating your food, taking up space? She should be on her own, learning to survive like other useless girls with no future." At first, Chief Ekwu ignored her words, but over time, they began to make sense to him. He had never cared for Niari the way he cared for Chiy, and now that she was older, he saw no reason to keep her in the house. He had never invested in her education, never given her opportunities, so in his eyes, she had no value. One evening, after a long day at work, he called Niari into the living room. "You are old enough now," he said coldly. "It's time for you to leave." Niari's heart stopped. "Leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "But where will I go?" "That is not my problem," Chief Ekwu replied. "You are strong enough to find your own way. I have done enough for you." Tears filled Niari's eyes as she turned to Masika, hoping for a shred of kindness. But her stepmother only smirked, satisfied that she had finally won. Chiy sat nearby, pretending not to care. He had grown up believing that Niari was beneath him, just a servant in their house. He saw no reason to defend her. That night, Niari packed the few clothes she had into a small bag. With no home, no money, and no family to turn to, she stepped out into the cold, dark streets of Lumora. She had nowhere to sleep and nothing to eat. She wandered the city, feeling lost and afraid, but she refused to break. The nights were the hardest. She curled up on empty sidewalks, using her bag as a pillow. Sometimes, kind strangers gave her scraps of food, but other nights, she went to bed hungry. Still, she refused to beg. She had always been strong, and she would find a way to survive. As the days passed, she searched for work, knocking on doors and asking for any job, no matter how small. Most people turned her away, but she never gave up. She had been cast out by her own father, betrayed by the people who were supposed to love her, but she was determined to prove that she was not weak. She would survive, no matter what it took. Cold, hungry, and alone, Niari wandered the streets of Lumora, searching for a way to survive. Each day was a struggle, but she refused to let despair consume her. She knocked on doors, begged for small jobs, and did whatever she could to earn a little money. Some people turned her away, others looked at her with pity, but she never stopped trying. One evening, as she sat outside a small restaurant, too exhausted to keep walking, an elderly woman approached her. The woman's face was kind, her eyes filled with warmth and understanding. She carried a basket of food and, without hesitation, handed Niari a piece of bread and a cup of warm tea. "What is your name, child?" the woman asked gently. "Niari," she whispered, her voice weak from hunger. The woman smiled. "I am Mama Yejide. You have the look of a fighter. Tell me, what has brought you to these streets?" With tears in her eyes, Niari told her story. She spoke of her father's rejection, her stepmother's cruelty, and the struggles she had faced since being cast out. Mama Yejide listened patiently, nodding as if she had heard similar tales before. When Niari finished, the old woman reached out and held her hand. "You are stronger than you know," Mama Yejide said. "Come with me. I cannot give you riches, but I can give you a place to sleep and a chance to build your future." Grateful beyond words, Niari followed Mama Yejide to her small but cozy home. The older woman lived modestly, making a living by selling handmade baskets and food at the market. She offered Niari a place to stay in exchange for helping with the work. Niari accepted eagerly, throwing herself into every task with determination. During the day, she helped Mama Yejide cook, clean, and sell goods in the market. At night, she attended secret evening classes, determined to educate herself. She studied under the dim glow of a candle, reading old business books and practicing math problems. Sleep was a luxury she rarely had time for, but she didn't care. She had a dream now, a vision of a future where she would never be powerless again. Years passed, and Niari's hard work began to pay off. She learned everything she could about business, saving every coin she earned. With Mama Yejide's support, she started a small venture of her own, buying and reselling fabrics at the market. Her business grew quickly because she treated customers with kindness and honesty. People began to trust her, and soon, her name became known beyond the marketplace. With time, Niari expanded. She opened a small shop, then another. Her intelligence and determination attracted investors, and before long, she was running a successful business empire. The girl who had once been thrown out like a worthless burden was now one of the most respected entrepreneurs in Lumora. But Niari never forgot where she came from. She made a promise to herself. She would use her success to help others, just as Mama Yejide had helped her. Chiy had always lived in comfort, never knowing struggle or hardship. From a young age, he was given everything he wanted: expensive clothes, the latest gadgets, and a life of luxury that others could only dream of. While Niari had been forced to work like a servant, Chiy had been treated like royalty. He never had to lift a finger, and because of this, he grew up believing that money would always be there, no matter how he used it. As he became older, his arrogance grew. He spent recklessly, throwing lavish parties, buying luxury cars, and traveling to different cities just to impress his friends. He surrounded himself with people who only cared about his wealth, but he was too blinded by his own pride to see it. Whenever Chief Ekwu tried to advise him about business or responsibility, Chiy would simply laugh and wave him off. "Father, we have more than enough money. Why should I worry?" he would say, sipping expensive wine while lounging in his grand estate. Chief Ekwu, though concerned, continued to indulge his son, believing that Chiy would one day mature and take over the family business. But instead of learning, Chiy made one bad decision after another. He invested in shady deals without research, poured money into failing businesses, and borrowed huge sums from people with dangerous reputations. He was warned many times, but he never listened. His gambling habit only made things worse. At first, he won often, and the thrill of easy money excited him. But greed always leads to downfall. Soon, his luck ran out. He began losing more than he won, but instead of stopping, he kept playing, desperate to recover what he had lost. The more he lost, the more desperate he became, until he found himself drowning in debt. Meanwhile, Chief Ekwu's business, once strong and thriving, started to crumble under the weight of Chiy's reckless spending. The company's accounts were drained, and investors pulled away, losing faith in the leadership. Suppliers refused to do business with them, and the once loyal employees began looking for other jobs, sensing that the empire was falling apart. When Chief Ekwu finally realized the full extent of the damage, it was too late. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Chiy was nowhere to be found. He had fled, leaving behind nothing but unpaid debts and broken promises. For the first time in his life, Chief Ekwu felt true fear. The money he had once relied on was gone, and the son he had placed all his hopes in had abandoned him. The same man who had once looked down on Niari, calling her useless, now found himself standing on the edge of ruin, with no one left to save him. Chief Ekwu had always been a man of power and wealth. For years, people respected him, not because of his kindness, but because of his money. His businesses were once strong, his influence undeniable, but now, everything was falling apart before his eyes. The debts kept piling up, and there was no money left to pay them. The company's doors, once welcoming to high-profile clients, were now shut. Suppliers refused to do business with him, and the employees he once commanded had moved on, finding more stable jobs elsewhere. The proud Chief Ekwu, who had once looked down on others, now found himself running from creditors, avoiding phone calls, and pleading with banks to give him more time. At home, things were no better. Massacre, the woman who had once whispered poison into his ears, who had encouraged him to cast out his own daughter, was nowhere to be found. She had taken what little wealth remained, her jewelry, expensive clothes, and whatever cash she could gather, and disappeared without a trace. She left no note, no goodbye, just an empty house and a cold silence that echoed louder than any words could. Ekwu sat in the grand living room of his mansion, now stripped of its former glory. The furniture had been sold off, the chandeliers were gone, and the once polished floors were covered in dust. He had never imagined his life would end up like this. With shaking hands, he picked up his phone and dialed the one person he believed could still help him, his beloved son, Chiy. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. He tried again, then again, still nothing. Panic settled in his chest. Where was Chiy? His son, his pride, his everything. Surely he wouldn't abandon his own father in such a desperate time. He called old friends, business associates, anyone who might know where Chiy had gone. But the answers were always the same. He's disappeared. No one has seen him in weeks. He left the country. I heard he ran away from his debts. Ekwu felt his world shatter. The son he had given everything to, the boy he had raised above all else, had abandoned him without a second thought. The realization hit him like a thunderstorm. He had pushed away the one child who might have truly cared for him, all for a son who never truly valued him. Now, there was no one left. No money, no business, no wife, no son. He was alone, stripped of everything he had once taken for granted. And as he sat in the darkness of his ruined home, he finally understood the painful truth. He had built his life on the wrong foundation, and now he was paying the price. Chief Ekwu had never felt this kind of shame before. The once mighty businessman, who had commanded respect wherever he went, was now nothing more than a shadow of his former self. His fine clothes were worn out, his shoes scuffed, and his face, once full of pride, now carried deep lines of regret. With no home and no money, he wandered the streets of Lumora, searching for someone, anyone who could help him. One by one, he approached the wealthy men he once did business with. He walked into offices where he used to be greeted with smiles and handshakes, but now, they barely spared him a glance. Some refused to see him at all. Others listened to his pleas, then coldly dismissed him. Ekwu, you had it all, one man said, shaking his head. You squandered it. No one is going to save you now. Defeated, Ekwu sat outside a busy marketplace, his stomach empty, and his mind clouded with despair. He had never imagined his life would come to this. Then, he overheard two traders talking. Have you heard about the new business mogul? One of them said. She's powerful, wealthy, and highly respected. People say she has a heart for the less fortunate. Yes, I've heard of her, the other trader replied. Her name is Niari. She owns several companies now. She's built herself from nothing. The name struck Ekwu like a lightning bolt. Niari, his daughter, the girl he had thrown away like she was worthless. It couldn't be, but the more they spoke, the clearer it became. It was her. Ekwu's heart pounded as he made his way to her company headquarters. The building was massive, far grander than anything he had ever owned. The walls were made of polished stone, and the name Niari Group was displayed in bold golden letters at the entrance. As he walked inside, he felt out of place among the well-dressed employees. He hesitated, then approached the receptionist. I need to see Niari, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you have an appointment? She asked. No, he admitted. But tell her Chief Ekwu is here. Tell her it's urgent. The receptionist hesitated, then made a call. Minutes later, he was led to an office so grand it made his old mansion seem small, and there, sitting behind a large desk, was his daughter. Niari looked powerful, confident, and nothing like the helpless girl he had once abandoned. When she saw him, her face remained unreadable. She didn't rush to embrace him, nor did she cry. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, studying him with calm, piercing eyes. For the first time in his life, Chief Ekwu, the once proud man, felt truly powerless. He had come begging, and the only person who could help him was the daughter he had cast away. Chief Ekwu stood before Niari, his once proud shoulders slumped, his hands trembling at his sides. The rich clothes he used to wear were long gone, replaced by worn-out fabric that barely covered his tired body. He had walked into this grand office hoping for mercy, but as he looked into his daughter's eyes, he saw nothing but calm strength. She was no longer the helpless girl he had cast away. She was powerful now, in ways he had never imagined. Niari, my daughter, he began, his voice weak, almost unrecognizable. I have lost everything. I have nowhere to go. Please. I need your help. Niari remained silent for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his face. The man in front of her was no longer the same Chief Ekwu who had turned his back on her all those years ago. The arrogance, the cruelty, the indifference, it was all gone. Now, he was just a broken man, begging for the kindness he had denied her. You need my help? Niari finally spoke, her voice steady but cold. The same way I needed yours when I was thrown out of my own home. The same way I begged for love, for acceptance, but was treated like nothing. Ekwu's lips quivered. I was wrong, he admitted. I was blind. Masika poisoned my mind. She made me believe. Masika may have fed you lies, Niari interrupted. But you chose to believe them. You chose to see me as a burden. You let me suffer while Chiy lived in luxury. She shook her head. And now that Chiy is gone, and Masika has abandoned you, you suddenly remember you have a daughter. Ekwu's eyes filled with shame. He could not argue. He had no defense. I worked hard, Niari continued, her voice filled with quiet strength. I built myself up from nothing. I fought for everything I have today, and I did it without you. Ekwu took a step forward. Please, Niari, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I have no one left. Just let me stay. Let me work for you. Anything. Niari sighed, leaning back in her chair. I am not the same girl you abandoned. I have moved forward. I have built a life filled with strength and success. But I have also learned that I must protect my peace. She paused, then looked him straight in the eye. I do not allow toxic people back into my life. Ekwu's breath caught in his throat. He knew then that he had lost her, not because she was cruel, but because she had learned to value herself in a way he never had. Tears welled in his eyes, but he knew there was nothing more to say. The daughter he had thrown away had risen far beyond him, and now she was the one who held the power to decide his fate. Chief Ekwu walked the streets of Lumora, a shadow of the powerful man he once was. His fine clothes were now rags, his once strong frame reduced to skin and bones. The people who once bowed to him now passed him by without a second glance. Those who recognized him whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. This is what happens when greed blinds a man, they murmured. The grand mansion he had once filled with luxury was gone. His businesses had collapsed. His wife, Masika, had taken what little remained and disappeared. His son, Chiy, whom he had showered with wealth and privilege, had abandoned him the moment there was nothing left to take. Chief Ekwu had searched for him, hoping, praying that his son would at least stand by him in his time of need. But Chiy had vanished like the wind, leaving his father to suffer alone. Ekwu had begged for help from old business partners, friends, and even distant relatives. Each time, he was met with rejection. Doors slammed in his face, voices turned cold, and the same words were repeated over and over. You showed no mercy when you had everything. Why should we show mercy to you now? He found himself wandering aimlessly, his stomach empty, his body weak. He no longer had the energy to beg. There was no fight left in him. The once proud chief, who had looked down on the poor, now sat on the streets like a beggar himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, Chief Ekwu sat by the marketplace, his back against a crumbling wall. He watched as people moved about their lives, traders shouting prices, children laughing, families enjoying meals together. Once upon a time, he had everything, but he had thrown it all away. He thought of Niari, the daughter he had discarded, like she was nothing. She had risen from the ashes, built herself up, and become greater than he had ever been. And yet, when he stood before her, pleading for help, she had looked at him with strength in her eyes. Not hatred, not revenge, just the quiet understanding that he was no longer a part of her life. Regret settled in his chest like a heavy stone. He had chosen wealth over love, arrogance over kindness, and in the end, he had lost everything. As the night grew colder, Chief Ekwu curled into himself, his body trembling, his heart weighed down with sorrow. The world moved on around him, but for him, time had stopped. He was no longer a chief, no longer a businessman, no longer a father. He was just a man who had wasted his life on the wrong things, and now there was no one left to save him. Niari stood at the top of the tallest building in Lumora, looking out at the city that had once been her prison. The streets below were filled with people, rushing to work, selling goods, chasing dreams. She had once walked those same streets with nothing but hunger in her belly and determination in her heart. Now, she owned businesses that provided jobs to thousands, and her name was spoken with respect. Despite all she had suffered, Niari had refused to let bitterness consume her. She had chosen to rise above the pain, to turn her hardships into fuel for something greater. With every business she built, every success she achieved, she proved that she was more than the girl her father had abandoned. She was strong, she was unstoppable, and she was free. But Niari did not stop at building wealth. She knew what it was like to be alone, to have no one to turn to, and so she dedicated her life to lifting others up. She created shelters for young girls who had been cast aside, offering them a home, education, and a chance to dream. She funded schools and businesses, giving opportunities to those who had been overlooked. Whenever she saw a struggling young girl with the same pain in her eyes that she once carried, Niari extended a helping hand. Her story spread throughout Lumora, becoming a tale of inspiration. People admired her not just for her success, but for her kindness. They spoke of how she had faced cruelty, but never let it turn her heart cold. She had every reason to seek revenge, to destroy those who had hurt her, but instead, she chose peace. That, they said, was the true power of a great woman. One evening, as she walked through the streets of Lumora, she passed by a group of children playing. One of them, a little girl with bright eyes, ran up to her and held out a flower. "You are Niari, the kind lady who helps people," the girl said with a shy smile. Niari knelt down and took the flower, her heart swelling with warmth. "Thank you," she said gently. "Always remember, no matter what happens, you are strong." The little girl grinned and ran back to her friends, and Niari watched her go, knowing that she had done what she had always dreamed of. She had broken the cycle. She had spent years proving herself to the world, proving that she was more than what her father had believed. But standing there, surrounded by the people she had helped, she realized something. She no longer needed validation. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her success, her kindness, her peace, those were her victories, and that was all the justice she would ever need.